I'm Angela Fair. My channel here is all about helping you grow your watercolor techniques and develop your personal style so that you can become your own favorite artist. Our goal today is to really get to know the color yellow. Yellow is a primary color. It's one of the foundational colors you're going to need in your watercolor palette, and yet choosing the right yellow can have a huge impact on the mood of your painting. And learning how to mix yellow can give you so many options for creating beautiful neutrals and vibrant color contrasts in your paintings. I have hundreds of hours of watercolor lessons here on YouTube, and by subscribing to my channel, it'll really be easy for you to access the catalog of all of those lessons. Why don't you go ahead and do that right now? All the supplies I've used today are linked up in the description below. Let's get started. So let's look at some different yellows and talk about them. As we think about working with the color yellow, yellow is a primary color, which means it's one of the foundational colors that all our secondary colors are created from. We use yellow to mix with red or magenta to create an orange. We use yellow with blue to make green, and we get all kinds of variations in between when we start to really get creative with it. So I've just placed some aureolin down on the paper, and I'm going to throw a couple of other yellows down and we'll take a look and compare them. And these aren't all the yellows I have in my palette. This is Nicolezo yellow. You can see it's quite a bit warmer. It's got a bit of an earthier tone, a little bit more of a coppery feel to it. And we see that when we start to compare yellow with the yellows with each other, because so often I'm asked which colors are warm and which are cool. How do I know if I'm getting a warm or cool version of each color in my palette? And color temperature is relative, so that means you're not going to necessarily have a color that's always warm or always cool. It's going to feel warm or cool depending on the colors that are beside it. This is benzimidalone or something yellow made by Daniel Smith. You can see it kind of falls a little bit warmer than this yellow, and definitely cooler than this one. Let's see, what else do I have? This is Mars yellow. It's kind of a brownish yellow and quite opaque. It's going to cover really well, even though it is a light value color. If we want to get really cool, we pull out this yellow, which is called Bright Yellow Green. It's made by Schminke, and you can see it's very cool and it is verging toward green, having that very blue undertone. So I'm just gonna throw down some Aussie Red Gold, and you can see that's a very orangey yellow. And the color I choose very strongly depends on what I want to achieve in my painting, depending on how I want to mix it and the mood I want to create. There are times I need a warm yellow, something with a nice warm tone, and there are times when I need a cooler yellow. And so it really behooves all of us to get to know the yellows in our palette, instead of saying, well, this artist that I admire is using this warm yellow, so I need to change the warm yellow I'm using to that one. Really get to know the colors you're using before you switch, before you consider switching, because competent artists are the ones who really use the colors in their palette really well. Knowing which yellows generally manifest as warm or cool is going to help you to know how to paint with them. And I'm going to show you what I mean by that. First of all, a warm yellow is going to mix differently than a cool yellow. Let's use some Nicolezo yellow. And let's throw some green down and see what we get. I'm going to use my let's mix some blue to make green, and we'll see what we get. I'm going to use my Cinereous blue because it's a really nice kind of close to cyan color, which means it should mix really cleanly with the yellow, and I'm going to get a different green depending on which yellow I choose. So let's start with the Nicolezo yellow and the Cinereous blue, and I'm just going to keep adding yellow till I feel like it's closer to green than turquoise. That's pretty close, I think, so we'll use that. We'll put a swatch down here. And you can see I have a really nice green there. I don't know what it reminds me of. It's a bit of a leafy green. And let's choose some aureolin and do the same thing. Cinereous blue and aureolin. And that didn't take long. And we'll place that down. And what I'm getting by using a cooler yellow is a bit of a brighter tone to my green. It's a little less muted, it's a little bit more in your face. When I use a cooler yellow, because a yellow that's a little bit warm, it means it has just a touch of red or orange in it, that warmer tone, it means it's not going to mix as well with the blue. That means we have hints of all three primary colors, and when you have a hint of all three primary colors, you start to get a neutral. What happens when we mix all three primaries? Let's try the cinereous blue and the aureolin, and we'll choose the magenta. How about this? Oh, quin magenta over here, rather. And we start to mix those, and right away we start to get a murky gray mud. And anytime you're mixing all three primaries, you're going to start to see some neutralization of your colors happening. The colors are going to start to get dull. And so knowing that a warm yellow is going to mix in a little bit more of a muted, subdued, neutral way with a blue is really helpful to me in knowing, in planning the colors that I want to get. When we're mixing yellow, we're also going to want to use yellow sometimes to make neutrals. Okay, so when I go into use my yellow, and we're just going to keep going back to, actually we're going to go to the Benz yellow this time. It's a really nice kind of middle ground yellow, I think. If you want a yellow that's close to the yellow that might go into your printer, which I would say is I like to use the printer cartridge standard as my choice when I'm thinking about wanting to mix nice pure colors, because we do get a good result when we're using the printer. Let's choose a violet. So we're going to choose this carbazole violet, which is, as you can see, really dark in full saturation, really beautiful, rich purple. And we're going to use that in a very small dose to mix ourselves a neutral with our yellow. And because violet is a secondary color made from blue and pink or red, it is the opposite. It's the complement to yellow. And by mixing a little bit of that into my yellow here, it generally, when I'm mixing yellow and violet, sometimes you'll get a neutral that's more of a gray. But in the case of violet and yellow, usually it veers toward brown, and I don't know why that is. It could be my mixing abilities, but as you can see, we start to get a brown here. And the beautiful thing, of course, about mixing neutrals is that we can vary the proportions. So we can start with this carbazole violet, quite a rich saturation, but it still has a hint of yellow in it. And so when I place that on the paper, you can see I have this beautiful smoky violet in comparison to the original hue of the carbazole violet. And so often, if you're not a neutral fan, you might be thinking, well, I'd never want to make that ugly brown. But adding a tiny touch of yellow to your violet is going to give you this beautiful smoky hue, which would be really beautiful in a stormy sky, distant hills. Oh, I can just think of so many ways to use this. Storm-tossed waters, a lot of fun. And the same goes for adding violet to yellow. And that's a little bit more of a challenge because it only takes a tiny speck of violet to really neutralize this yellow. We're going to try to just add a teeny bit of it. And just, well, even just in that tiny proportion, this is the original, we get a toned down yellow. It's a little bit more muted. And just try not to apply it with a hammer here, but just really gently. We really get these earthy, soft yellows. I could see that being a really nice beach sand, actually. And anywhere you kind of need that murkier yellow and kind of that nondescript beige color, really easy to make that using violet and yellow. Now let's take a look at doing the same thing again. We're running out of space here, but I want to take a look at how I might use an orangey yellow. So let's choose our Aussie Red Gold. And Aussie Red Gold is this lovely orange here that we had, really beautiful diluted. And it doesn't mix as well as some others because it is a mixed pigment. It's not a pure pigment, it's a combination of 3 other pigments. We start adding violet to it. And it seems like the more pigments you add, the more neutral it's going to get, and it generally makes muddy colors really quickly. You can see adding just a hint of violet gives us this beautiful, really kind of complex murky brown, and we'll go a little bolder. See how close we can get to like a true brown. And overdoing it, of course. This is where you get to be kind of a mad scientist with your colors in your palette. Just adding a dab of this and a dab of that can give you some really beautiful hues. And actually, I'm really liking this brown, and I've never mixed Aussie Red Gold and Carbazole Violet before. And now I'm thinking, why did I take so long? Because look at that beautiful chocolatey hue. I don't know, maybe that's more of a chestnut. Beautiful shade. Really nice, warm brown, I would call that. The hint of orange in that Aussie Red Gold and the violet just pair really nicely. I'm making a mental note to self right now to use that in a future painting very soon. The other thing that you need to remember as you start mixing color, and I really encourage you to do this, rather than having browns in your palette, take the time to learn to mix your complementary colors to make your neutrals. As this one has dried, this little bit of yellow and violet, it's actually gotten really beautiful, and I don't think you're going to see it nearly as well as I can on the camera, but the colors are still mixed, but they've almost started to separate. There's just like this yellow undertone sheen to it as the violet seems to almost be floating on top, and it's just this beautiful complex thing that watercolor does, creating a new color while hints of the original colors are still kind of swimming below the surface for the discerning eye to see it. And really getting close when you're looking at watercolor, and watch for those beautiful mixes and how they separate and granulate. Different colors do it more boldly than others. And when you start to mix your colors and look for those beautiful complex mixes, they just give your painting these beautiful rich depths that are so evocative and compelling. I just love that about my watercolors, and that's one of the reasons I love using primary colors to mix new colors. Even though I have a palette full of beautiful watercolor, and isn't it fun just to spin it around like that? Even though I have a palette full of beautiful watercolor, I still get so much gratification out of mixing my own hues and creating these complex, beautiful things on the paper. And as you're painting, you get the opportunity to create some beauty as well. I've showed you a lot of different yellows. We're going to pause for just a second, and I'll show you a few of my favorites. When you're choosing yellow, like I said previously, you want to have a warm yellow and a cool yellow, at least one of each in your palette. And which ones you use really depend on your preferences as an artist. You might prefer transparent colors. You might want to include an opaque watercolor in your palette. There are some really wonderful resources out there for choosing a basic palette, and I can throw some links to sites I recommend in the description below the video. For now, let's just take a look at a few yellows that I really enjoy using. So these are ones I haven't chosen because they were warm or cool. They're ones that suit my painting style and colors that I find making an appearance in my paintings. Number one, I think we'll go with a yellow I've already showed you, Nickel Azo Yellow from Daniel Smith. The Nickel Azo Yellow is a warm yellow. It's got a really nice coppery undertone, beautiful transparency, and strong dispersion. When you place it into a wet wash, it pushes out and creates this beautiful flow. This is quinacridone gold. I was hesitant to even show it to you. It's a beautiful warm gold verging on orange, and it's a lovely transparent color. However, there's a lot of complaining right now because quinacridone gold, the original single pigment color, is no longer available. The one that Daniel Smith has created to replace it is a very close substitution. You will notice a difference when you're mixing the color, trying to get the same mixes you had before if you've had the original quinacridone gold. If you haven't, just use the color and decide for yourself whether or not it's a color you like and want to use in your palette. Really, that's the best way to know if a color is right for you. And that's why companies like Daniel Smith make dot cards. You can buy the dot card, try out every color, and see which ones you like. And I really encourage you to spend the money and get one of those dot cards if you're curious about a brand and want to get a feel for the colors before you invest in buying full tubes. Since we're on Daniel Smith, the other Daniel Smith color I really love is Aussie Red Gold. Aussie Red Gold has a bit of opacity to it. It's just a really gorgeous color, and I love playing with it. Whenever I use Aussie Red Gold in a first layer wash, I just love that wash. It just makes some really beautiful effects as you let it flow across the paper. And it makes some really interesting neutrals and muddy colors when you start to mix it. Another brand I really like is Core Watercolor, made by Golden. Core pigments are made with an Aquazol binder, and they have a really high saturation of color. They're very bright, very brilliant. The pigments are very finely ground, so you don't get a lot of granular effects with Core, but you do get beautiful rate of flow. The colors disperse beautifully. You get some gorgeous transparency in their transparent hues, and the colors don't fade as they dry. This is Cadmium Yellow Medium. I love using Cadmium Yellow as an opaque color. It covers really well, which means you can use it toward the end of a painting session and it'll still retain its identity layered over darker colors. That's cadmium. Pretty much all of the cadmiums have that opacity to them. And Indian Yellow is a really vibrant kind of school bus yellow, very transparent, very vibrant, lots of fun to play with and mix. And then my cool yellow is, my new favorite is this bright yellow green made by Sennelier. It is really bright. It says yellow green, but it's really much more yellow than green in my opinion, and really beautiful when you need that cool yellow in your painting. So those are 6 of my favorite yellows. There's many more, and I'm always experimenting with my colors, finding new ways to use them. And when I find a new color combination, it's always inspiring, and generally that makes that color become my new favorite. So playing with color is really the best way to get to love a color. The painting shown below is a little exploration in yellow that I will share with you in my bonus content. Take a look at the description below the video to find out how you can access the free bonus content for this lesson. I think it's really important to talk about an aspect of yellow that seems really obvious and yet is something that seems to be frequently overlooked, and that is that yellow is a light value color. No matter how much Nicolazo yellow I put on my brush, it will never be darker than that. That is as dark as Nicolazo yellow gets. So that means if I want to use that, if I need dark yellow in my painting, and I want it to serve as a dark value, I'd better not be using a lot of a darker value color, like this violet alongside of it. Because as you can see, on a scale, a gray scale from 1 to 10, yellow is never going to be more than, oh, maybe a 5. And with the violet, we can get pretty close to 10. And it's important to understand this and why value is important, because there's 2 mistakes that I often see artists making. So let's talk about how to create shadows on yellow, because there are times when you need to darken your yellow, go darker than the value of the purest saturation of that yellow. And what I've found is that if you're going to use a blue, and I've placed some ultramarine in this little flower shaped wash, you're going to see your shadows taking on that greenish cast. And a lot of the time green is going to look more leaf-like than shadow-like. We have to remember that shadows decrease intensity of color. The colors become more muted and more neutral, as well as becoming cooler. So that means our yellow needs to be cooler and less intense. Here I've used a violet, a reddish violet, to create my shadow. And as you can see, that shadow has taken a very brownish cast. And in this petal, I've used a kind of smoky violet, blue violet. And the smoky blue violet has given us a more gray cast to our shadow. One thing that can help you as you're mixing your shadows is actually in the areas where the shadow is going to fall, put less yellow pigment there, and it will become easier to choose a complement mix of yellow. So you're going to mix your violet and your yellow to get that shadowed color, or your blue violet and your yellow to get that gray, and it will transition just a little bit better if you're trying to layer a complementary color, a cooler color over top of an area that has a lot of yellow on it. The other mistake that I see people making with yellow is that they use more yellow to make their painting brighter. And the problem is that our very lightest value in our painting is always going to be the white of our paper. White is the lightest, brightest value you're going to find in your watercolor painting. You cannot get brighter than white. So when you are painting a sunset, for example, and in the very brightest area of the sunset, you layer a thick wash of yellow, you've actually decreased the brightness of the painting. With value and working with yellow, this is the range you have to work from. White to that fullest saturation. And if you can remember this, you'll get much better effects than trying to put more yellow paint on the paper in an effort to become brighter. You keep your whites from the very beginning, and you'll have those strong brights. And the white will look brighter when it's surrounded by a darker value color. So we have our white inside a box right here, and it's going to glow a bit. And our yellow inside a box right here. Which box is brighter? You can see it right away, the white box is brighter. So remember that. Surround your lightest values with those darker colors. They will pop more. And the most diluted wash of any color is going to be your lightest value next to white. I hope this video has showed you some ways that you can use yellow more confidently and competently in your paintings. I have additional videos focusing on other colors, and I'll link those up in the description below the video. I also have a bonus lesson that I created to accompany this lesson where I use some of my very favorite yellows to create an abstract watercolor painting. You can receive access to that video by signing up in the description below. So what are you waiting for? Sign up now. Everything you need to know is down below in the description.